The Cain and Abel story is one of the best known stories of the Old Testament, but in the grand scheme of things, neither Cain nor Abel is anything more than a supporting role. The story of the first murder victim, Abel, and his murderer brother Cain is really just an illustrative aside. It illustrates a truth that will be key to the main plot of the Bible, a truth that is made explicit to us in the description of a more central character than either Cain or Abel, their younger brother, Seth. We don't know how long after the fall into sin and the exile from the Garden of Eden it was that Cain was born, and we're only told that it was later that Eve gave birth to Abel, but it was 130 years after his creation that Adam became the father of a child he named Seth. And the change that took place, probably relatively early in those 130 years, and that is illustrated in the Cain and Abel story, Moses makes explicit when he describes Seth as a son in Adam's own likeness, in his own image. Adam himself was made in God's image. Seth was born in Adam's. Adam didn't look like God. God doesn't look like anything. He can look like whatever he wants, and when he makes himself visible at all, it is only ever as flame or light or cloud or a dove or Jesus Christ. So Adam didn't look like God, but at creation, Adam and Eve both resembled God. They were perfect, everything was, but Adam and Eve were perfect and knew it. They were conscious of it. They had a will that was perfectly in line with God's will. They had God's image. And probably relatively early in the 130 years between creation and Seth's birth, they lost it. They took that will that was in line with God's, and they chose something God cannot choose even if he wanted to. They sinned. Did Seth look like Adam or Eve? Probably a little of both, but he resembled them both exactly in a deeply disturbing way, in the same way that Cain and Abel had, and which led to Abel's murder and Cain's status as murderer. Seth was also a sinner, born from sinners, conceived sinful, destined from birth to sin. Seth was born in Adam's image. We all were. You and me and everyone we've ever met. Do you and I look alike? Probably at least a little. Though each of us is unique, we all have all the same ingredients, and we all resemble one another in the sinfulness we've each inherited from our parents. And they from theirs, and they from theirs, all the way back to the first parents, Seth's parents, the first sinners. In describing Seth, Moses makes explicit the difference between who we are and who we were created to be. Cain and Abel already illustrated it. With Seth, it is named, and in each of us, it is obvious we're sinners. But that's not the reason Seth is a more central character to the story than either Cain or Abel. They were all sinful. We all are. That doesn't make Seth unique. Seth is not unique and central to the story because of his sin. Seth is unique and central because he is the first step from Adam and Eve toward the solution to the problem we all inherit from them. Seth is the first person born in the genealogy of Jesus. Did Jesus look like Seth? Probably at least a little. But Jesus did not resemble Seth's image that he inherited from Adam. Jesus was Mary's son, descended from David, from Noah, from Seth, from Adam, but Jesus is God's son, and God's son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being. Jesus resembled God. Jesus is God. Jesus is perfect, and he lived perfectly for us, to restore us to the way we are supposed to be, to restore to us the image of God. So, Seth, the first person to be explicitly described as having the sinful nature with which we are all born, is the direct ancestor of God's solution to the sin that is in our natures. The truth that Cain and Abel illustrated was true of Seth too, and yet it was through Seth that the truth that sets us free, that God promised to Seth's parents immediately after their fall, that rescues us from their fall, that is our fall by heritage, it was through Seth that God's grace came to us, which is exactly what God's story is all about. You and I are dust and breath, loved by God, bought by Jesus. This podcast is produced by me, Ethan Cherney, a pastor in the Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod. Get in touch on Facebook at Dust and Breath Pod, on Twitter at Dust Breath Pod, or by emailing dustandbreathpod@gmail.com. Outro music arranged and performed by Mr. Peter Shawy, who is like a fruitful vine within your house. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you could leave a review in iTunes or just share an episode on social media, I'd really appreciate it. It's the only way other people can find the show. Now, go do what God made you to do. Be who God called you to be. Go see what God can do with dust and breath and faith in Jesus, his Son.